A girl brings home a stray puppy. At first, it seems like the sweetest rescue, but her parents realize too late it's not a dog. What starts as an innocent act of kindness spirals into something darker, something no one in that house was prepared for. The strange animal isn't just out of place. It's hiding a truth more dangerous than they could imagine. Every scratch on the floor, every shadow in the hall, every sound in the night carries a warning they ignored until it was far too late. And when the truth finally comes out, the family is forced to face a terrifying question. What exactly did she bring home? And will it destroy them before they can stop it? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The morning sun crept over the horizon, painting the small rural town of Pine Grove in soft, golden light. Dr. Ansel Merritt's boots crunched on the gravel as he made his way down the familiar route to his veterinary clinic. His weathered face bore the marks of someone who had seen too much, both during his time as an army medic and in his years caring for the town's animals. That's when he first noticed her, a brindle-coated stray dog sitting alertly near the old, rusted recreational vehicle behind Joe's tire shop. The business had been shuttered for months, its windows dusty and dark, but the dog's amber eyes were bright and focused. Something about her stance caught his attention, not the typical wariness of a stray but purposeful, almost sentinel-like. The next morning she was there again, and the next, and the next. Each time Ansel would slow his pace, studying the thin but determined creature. Her coat showed signs of recent injuries, and his professional instincts urged him to help, but she kept her distance, always watching the recreational vehicle with unwavering attention. On the fifth morning, everything changed. As Ansel approached, the brindle dog didn't maintain her usual position. Instead, she moved directly into his path, her scarred muzzle pointed toward him with unmistakable intent. When he tried to step around her, she shifted, blocking him again. "What is it, girl?" Ansel asked softly, crouching down to her level. "Are you finally ready for some help?" But the dog had other plans. She moved behind him, pressing against his legs, deliberately pushing him toward the recreational vehicle. Her behavior sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't random. This was communication. "You want me to check out the RV?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. The dog's intense stare confirmed his suspicion. Approaching the vehicle, Ansel noticed signs he hadn't seen from a distance. Scratch marks around the door, odd stains on the steps, and a faint but distinctive odor that his years of veterinary experience told him meant trouble. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the door handle, years of military training kicking in as his instincts screamed that something was very wrong. The door's rusty hinges protested as he forced it open. For a split second, there was only darkness. Then chaos erupted. A massive form hurtled toward him from the shadows, a muzzled mastiff, its powerful body propelled by fear and desperation. Ansel yelled in surprise, stumbling backward as he slammed the door shut. His heart pounded in his chest as he fell back against the recreational vehicle's outer wall. But in that brief, terrifying moment, he'd seen enough to haunt him for a lifetime. Stacked crates lined the walls, and within them, pairs of wounded eyes gleamed in the darkness. The metallic smell of blood hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just a case of animal abandonment. This was something far more sinister. The brindle dog whined softly, pressing against his leg. Looking down at her, Ansel saw something he hadn't noticed before. Beneath the dirt and injuries, there was an intelligence in those amber eyes that spoke of training, of purpose. "Come on," he said quietly, his voice steadier than he felt. "Let's get you checked out." To his surprise, she followed willingly as he led the way to his clinic just a few blocks away. The morning light was stronger now, and the town was beginning to stir. But Ansel's mind was fixed on what he'd discovered and the dog who had led him to it. In the clinic, Ansel worked methodically, cleaning the dog's wounds while speaking to her in soothing tones. She remained remarkably still, as if she understood the importance of the examination. When he reached for his microchip scanner, she didn't flinch, another sign that she'd once been more than just a stray. The scanner beeped, detecting a partially damaged chip. Ansel's eyes widened as he read the information. Lumen, and below that, a notation indicating she had been county property. The chip was partially burned, but the essential information was clear enough. This dog had once been a working animal, trained and certified. Lumen, he said softly, and her ears perked up at the name. What happened to you, girl? And what did you just show me? As he treated her injuries, mostly superficial cuts and bruises, thankfully, Ansel couldn't shake the image of those stacked crates, the muzzled mastiff, the blood. His medical training told him this wasn't a one-time occurrence. The setup was too organized, too systematic. Someone was running an operation out of that recreational vehicle, and from what he'd seen, it wasn't anything legal or humane. Looking at Lumen, who now sat calmly on his examination table, Ansel made a decision. He needed to report what he'd found. The authorities needed to know about the recreational vehicle and its grim contents. But first, he had to make sure Lumen was safe. Whatever she'd been through, whatever she'd led him to discover, she'd chosen to trust him. He wouldn't let her down. "You're staying with me," he told her firmly, reaching for his phone to call the local police. But as he did so, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of operation he'd stumbled upon, and why a former county-trained dog had been so determined to expose it. The images from the recreational vehicle wouldn't leave his mind. The stacked crates, the desperate eyes, the signs of suffering. Something systematic and cruel was happening in his quiet town. And somehow, Lumen had known exactly who to ask for help. The brindle dog pressed her head against his hand, as if offering reassurance. Despite the horror of what he'd discovered, Ansel felt a surge of determination. Whatever happened next, he would see this through. For Lumen, and for all the other dogs trapped in that dark place. As he dialed the police number, Ansel glanced at Lumen, who sat alert and watchful beside him. In her eyes, he saw not just trust, but purpose. She had chosen him for a reason, and now it was his turn to act. The morning sun streamed through the clinic windows, casting long shadows across the floor as Ansel prepared to report what they'd found. With trembling fingers, Ansel dialed the sheriff's office. His heart was still racing from what he'd witnessed at the RV, and he knew he needed to report it right away. After 3 rings, Sheriff Olin Harp's gruff voice came through the line. "Sheriff's office," Harp speaking. "Sheriff, this is Dr. Merritt, from the veterinary clinic. I need to report something disturbing I found this morning behind the old tire shop." There was a heavy pause before Harp responded, his tone instantly cooling. "You mean the private lot where you were trespassing, Doc?" Ansel's stomach dropped. "I had cause to investigate. There are dogs being kept in terrible conditions in an RV back there, caged, injured." "Now you listen here," Harp cut him off sharply. "That's contractor business you're sticking your nose into. Vale Animal Services handles county operations, and they don't need civilians interfering with their work." "But Sheriff, what you saw was while breaking and entering, which I could arrest you for right now. Consider this a friendly warning. Stay away from that lot and mind your own business. We clear?" The line went dead before Ansel could respond. He stood there holding the silent phone, doubt and frustration warring in his chest. The sheriff's dismissal felt like a physical blow. "Don't let him shake you," came Greta's steady voice from the doorway. His veterinary technician stood there in her blue scrubs, arms crossed. "I heard enough to guess how that went. Greta, I know what I saw in there. But if the sheriff won't even listen, then we'll figure out another way," she said firmly. "Tell me everything you found. As Ansel described the crated dogs and the concerning conditions, Greta's practical face grew more determined. "I believe you," she said when he finished, "and we can't just let this go." The sheriff mentioned Vale Animal Services, Ansel mused. "They're the county's main contractor for animal control." "All the more reason to investigate further," Greta replied. "Want backup tonight? We should document whatever's happening there." Ansel nodded gratefully. Having a witness would help. "And we should bring Lumen. Her instincts led me there in the first place." As dusk settled that evening, they parked Ansel's truck a block away from the tire shop. Lumen sat alertly in the back seat, her scarred muzzle twitching as she scented the air. But when they crept up to where the RV had been parked that morning, they found only tire tracks in the gravel. "Gone," Ansel muttered in frustration. "They must have moved it after I reported it." But Lumen was already pulling at her leash, nose to the ground. Her amber eyes were intense with purpose as she led them down a series of back streets, moving with surprising certainty. "She's tracking something specific," Greta observed quietly as they followed the dog's lead. "Maybe diesel fuel from the RV?" After 15 minutes of walking, they emerged onto Industrial Road, where several warehouses stood in various states of disrepair. Lumen brought them to a halt behind a stack of empty pallets, her body going rigid. There, idling in a gravel lot, was the same rusty RV. It was parked alongside a concrete warehouse building with faded lettering that read, "Vale Animal Services," above the loading dock. "Well, that connects some dots," Greta whispered. "Question is, what are they doing here at night?" They crept closer, keeping to the shadows. Through a gap where the warehouse's sliding door hadn't fully closed, Ansel could make out stacks of paperwork, ledgers spread across a desk, shelves lined with unmarked bottles that looked like veterinary drugs caught the dim light. Most telling were the rows of county-stamped metal cages, some still bearing official tags. A sharp click cut through the night air, the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter. Ansel's blood ran cold as he realized someone was photographing them, or more likely, his truck's license plate visible from the street. "We need to go," he breathed, tugging Greta back. "Someone's watching us." They retreated as casually as they could manage, but Ansel could feel unseen eyes following their every move. His mind raced with the implications of what they'd discovered. This wasn't just one suspicious RV. This was an organized operation, with connections to official contractors and, apparently, law enforcement willing to protect it. "What do we do now?" Greta asked once they were safely back in the truck. "The sheriff's clearly not going to help." "No," Ansel agreed grimly. "We'll need to look higher up. State investigators, maybe, or animal welfare organizations. Someone. Beyond local influence." Lumen whined softly from the back seat, pressing her nose against Ansel's shoulder. Her discovery had cracked open something much bigger and more dangerous than they'd initially suspected. But looking at her scarred, loyal face, Ansel knew they couldn't back down now. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Ansel's clinic as he spread the photos across his desk. Greta leaned over his shoulder, her brow furrowed with concern. They had spent the past few days quietly reaching out to potential allies, knowing they needed more support to tackle what they'd discovered. "These county inventory numbers," a sharp voice cut through their concentration. "They match our records from last year's shelter fire investigation." Ivy Rankin adjusted her glasses, her tailored suit looking oddly formal in the homey veterinary office. The insurance investigator had initially seemed skeptical when they'd called her, but the moment she saw Ansel's photos, her professional demeanor had shifted to intense focus. "The equipment that supposedly burned in that fire," she continued, tapping one photo with a manicured finger. "These cages have the same serial numbers. They were claimed as losses in the insurance filing." Ansel exchanged a meaningful look with Greta. "So, Vale Animal Services claimed insurance money for equipment that wasn't actually destroyed?" "Precisely." Ivy's lips pressed into a thin line. I've been trying to piece together that suspicious fire for months. Something never added up about the claim, but I couldn't prove anything concrete. Until now. A soft whine drew their attention. Lumen had been dozing in the corner, but suddenly sat up, her nose twitching. The brindle dog padded over to Ivy's briefcase and sniffed intently around its base. What's got her attention? Greta wondered aloud. There's just some old case files. In there, Ivy replied, including photos from the fire scene. Ansel watched Lumen's focused behavior with growing interest. You know, she's been doing this a lot, especially around certain smells. The way she alerts, it's trained behavior. A knock at the door made them all jump. Deputy Cole Waverly stood. In the doorway, his uniform slightly rumpled and his expression strained. Dr. Merritt, got a minute? They ushered him in, and the deputy's eyes darted nervously around the room before he spoke in a low voice. Look, I shouldn't be here, but something's not right at the department. The sheriff he's been having lots of private meetings with, Vale, and the county budget numbers for animal control services, they don't match what's actually being spent. Kickbacks? Ivy's question was sharp. Deputy Waverly swallowed hard. I can't prove anything, but the sheriff keeps telling us to look the other way when it comes to Vale's operation. Says it's just business as usual. While they talked, Lumen had moved to investigate the deputy's boots, showing the same intense focus she'd displayed earlier. Ansel watched her closely, an idea forming. Greta, he said slowly, remember how Lumen's chip showed she was county property? What if she wasn't just any county dog? What if she was trained for something specific? Ivy's eyes lit up with understanding. Like an accelerant detection dog? That would explain her interest in fire, scene photos, and why someone might want her to disappear after the shelter fire, Greta added quietly. They spent the next hour piecing together their knowledge. Ivy shared details about insurance inconsistencies, while Deputy Waverly reluctantly admitted to patterns of suspicious activity he'd noticed at the department. All the while, Lumen moved between them, as if sensing the importance of their discussion. We need hard evidence, Ansel finally said, running a hand through his hair. Something they can't deny or cover up. Greta straightened in her chair. What about a sting? Set up someone to pose as a buyer? It would have to be someone they don't know, Deputy Waverly cautioned. They're careful about new faces. I have a colleague from the state office, Ivy offered. Someone who could pass as a legitimate buyer interested in their operation. If we could catch them making a handoff at that RV. And record everything, Ansel nodded, energy building as the plan took shape. Video evidence of the exchange, the animals, the money, all of it. They gathered around Ansel's desk, sketching out the details of their plan. Ivy would coordinate with her state contact to set up the fake buy. Deputy Waverly would provide intel on Vale's movements and the sheriff's schedule. Greta would handle the recording equipment, while Ansel and Lumen would be ready to document any animals involved. As they finalized the details, Ansel felt a mix of determination and anxiety settle in his chest. He looked down at Lumen, who met, his gaze with steady amber eyes. This wasn't just about one dog anymore. It was about every animal being exploited by Vale's operation, about the oath he'd taken as a veterinarian to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. We all understand. The risks? He asked the group soberly. If this goes wrong, some risks are worth taking, Ivy replied firmly, especially when the alternative is letting them continue unchecked. Deputy Waverly nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. I'll do my part. Just be careful. Vale has friends in high places. Then it's settled, Greta said, her voice steady and sure. We set up the sting, catch them in the act, and make sure they can't wriggle out of it this time. As their impromptu meeting broke up and their allies departed, Ansel remained at his desk, studying the photos spread before him. Lumen rested her head on his knee, offering silent support. He scratched behind her ears, drawing strength from her presence. "We're going to make this right," he promised softly. "For all of them." The gravel crunched under Ansel's boots as he paced the empty lot, checking his phone for the 100th time. His heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to appear casual. Greta crouched behind a stack of old pallets 30 feet away, her camera ready. Lumen lay quietly beside, her ears pricked forward, watching. "They're coming," Ansel whispered into his concealed microphone. He'd sent the text 20 minutes ago, playing the role of an interested buyer who'd heard through carefully planted channels about Vale's special inventory. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lot when a white van appeared, rolling slowly through the entrance. Ansel straightened his jacket, remembering Ivy's coaching. Act entitled, impatient. These guys expect buyers to be jerks. The van pulled up 10 feet away. 2 men stepped out, one tall and wiry, the other built like a linebacker. Neither looked friendly. The bigger man yanked open the van's rear doors. "Show me what you got," Ansel said, injecting irritation into his voice. The sound of Greta's camera clicking softly in the background gave him courage. The men hauled out 3 large metal crates. Whimpers and rustling came from inside. Ansel's stomach turned, but he maintained his annoyed buyer persona. "Premium stock," the wiry man said, lifting a corner of the tarp covering one crate. Inside, a purebred German shepherd cowered, fresh surgical scars visible on its flank. "Medical certification included, no questions asked." Ansel reached for the envelope of marked bills in his pocket. "Let's make this quick." Well, well. A new voice cut through the lot like a knife. "What do we have here?" Kendrick Vale emerged from behind a storage container, his expensive boots crunching on gravel, his weathered face twisted into something between a smile and a snarl. "Dr. Merritt, playing detective?" Before Ansel could respond, another vehicle rolled in, a police cruiser. Sheriff Harp stepped out, adjusting his gun belt with deliberate slowness. "Seems we've caught someone attempting to interfere with legitimate county business," Vale said smoothly. His crew was already loading the crates back into the van, movements practiced and quick. "That's not what this is," Ansel started, but Sheriff Harp cut him off. "Hand over your phone, Dr. Merritt." The sheriff's voice was flat. "Evidence in an ongoing investigation into harassment of a county contractor." "You can't." "I can, and I will." Harp's hand rested on his weapon. "Unless you'd prefer to discuss obstruction charges downtown?" Ansel's fingers tightened around his phone. Everything they'd documented was on it, but Harp was already reaching for it, and Vale watched with undisguised satisfaction. "The law's clear on this, Doc," Vale said, his tone dripping false concern. "You're the one crossing lines here. I'd hate to see your practice suffer from unfounded accusations." The threat hung in the air as Harp pocketed Ansel's phone. The van's engine started up, and Vale's men pulled away without another word. They looked smug, confident in their protection. "Consider this a friendly warning," Harp said. "Stop poking around in matters that don't concern you. Next time won't be so pleasant." The sheriff returned to his cruiser, leaving Ansel standing alone in the lot. Vale lingered a moment longer, his smile now genuine and cruel. "You're out of your depth, Doctor," he said quietly. "Walk away while you can." Then he too was gone, leaving only dust and the sound of departing vehicles. Greta emerged from her hiding spot, Lumen at her heels. The dog's hackles were still raised, a low growl rumbling in her chest. "Tell me you got it all," Ansel said, his voice rough with anger. Greta nodded, clutching her camera. "Everything. But with Harp involved, I know." Ansel ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. The truth hit him like a physical blow. The very authorities meant to stop this kind of operation were actively protecting it. Their small victory in documenting the exchange had turned into a trap, with their primary evidence now in hostile hands. But as Lumen pressed against his leg, her steady presence a reminder of why they'd started this fight, Ansel felt his determination harden rather than break. Vale and Harp might have won this round, but they'd just proved something crucial. There was definitely something worth hiding. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple as they walked back to Greta's car. None of them spoke, but the silence carried weight. They'd seen the truth of what they were up against, not just criminals, but criminals with badges and contracts protecting them. Ivy Rankin sat at her cluttered desk, her fingers flying over her keyboard as she dug deeper into Lumen's fragmented microchip data. The afternoon sun slanted through her office blinds, casting striped shadows across stacks of case files. Her eyes widened as she clicked through archived county records. "Ansel, you need to see this," she called out, waving him over from where he'd been pacing. Lumen wasn't just any police dog. She was specifically trained in accelerant detection. Ansel leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the screen. Lumen, who had been dozing in the corner, lifted her head at the sound of her name. "Accelerant detection? You mean she was trained to find evidence of arson?" "Exactly." Ivy pulled up another document. She worked with the county fire marshal until an injury forced her retirement 2 years ago. Then she supposedly died in a training accident, except clearly she didn't. Greta, who had been sorting through photographs from their surveillance, joined them at the computer. That explains her behavior around the RV. She wasn't just drawn to it randomly, she was alerting to fuel or other accelerants inside. And that's not all, Ivy continued, her voice tense with urgency. She opened another file. "Remember that shelter fire last year? The one that destroyed Vale Animal Services' main facility? Look at this." She pointed to a chemical analysis report. "The accelerant signatures from that fire match traces we've found near where the RV has been parked." Ansel's stomach turned as the pieces clicked into place. They're using the RV as a mobile crime scene. When they need to dispose of evidence, or animals, they torch it, Ivy finished grimly. "The shelter fire wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. They destroyed records, collected insurance money, and kept right on operating with these mobile units instead." Lumen padded over to Ansel, pressing against his leg. He absently stroked her scarred muzzle, his mind racing. "This is bigger than trafficking. It's fraud, arson, maybe even murder," Greta whispered. "If anyone was in that shelter when it burned..." Ivy shuffled through more papers. The insurance payout was substantial, over $500,000. And look who signed off on the investigation. She held up a document bearing Sheriff Harp's signature. "That's why he's been blocking us at every turn," Ansel said. "He's complicit in all of it." They sat in heavy silence for a moment, the weight of the revelation settling over them. Lumen whined softly, her amber eyes fixed on Ansel with an intensity that seemed to carry all the horror of what she'd witnessed. "We can't take this to local authorities," Greta said finally. "Harp will just bury it again." Ansel stood up straight, his fear crystallizing into determination. "No, we need to go over his head entirely. State police, FBI, someone with jurisdiction he can't touch." "We'll need redundant evidence," Ivy added. "Multiple copies, different locations, the kind of proof he can't make disappear." She began, typing rapidly. "I can start building a case file with the insurance fraud angle. That alone should be enough to trigger a state investigation. And I've got all our surveillance photos backed up to 3 different cloud servers," Greta said. "Plus the chemical analysis reports." Ansel looked down at Lumen, who had never left his side. "And we have a living witness, a trained accelerant detection dog who can prove the connection between the RV and the shelter fire." "The RV is the key," Ivy said, her voice urgent. "It's not just evidence. It's an active threat. They've used it before. They'll use it again. All it would take is one match to destroy more evidence, or silence witnesses." The danger felt immediate now, no longer theoretical. Ansel could almost smell phantom smoke, see flames licking at the edges of his vision. The RV wasn't just a vehicle anymore. It was a fuse waiting to be lit. "We need to move fast," he said. "Every day we wait puts more animals at risk, and now that we know what they're capable of..." "I'll reach out to some contacts at the state level," Ivy promised. "We'll build this case right, airtight. They won't be able to wriggle out of this one." Greta started gathering their evidence into organized files. "I'll get everything digitized and secured tonight." Lumen stood up, her posture alert, nose twitching. She paced to the window, staring out into the parking lot with the same intensity she'd shown around the RV. Ansel joined her, scanning for any sign of threat, but saw only empty spaces and long shadows. Still, her unease was contagious. They were no longer just fighting corruption. They were challenging people who had already proven willing to destroy evidence and lives in flames. The stakes had never been higher. "Tomorrow," Ansel said firmly. "We start building the case tomorrow. Tonight we make sure everything we have is safe and backed up. We can't risk losing a single piece of evidence." The others nodded, the gravity of their situation reflected in their tight expressions. As they worked late into the evening, securing their findings and planning their next moves, Lumen kept her, vigil at the window. A guardian who had already survived one fire, watching to prevent another. The morning light filtered through the clinic windows as Ansel, Greta, and Ivy gathered around the examination table, now covered with maps and equipment, instead of medical supplies. Their preparation had to be perfect. They couldn't afford any mistakes. Ivy hung up her phone with a satisfied nod. "I've got a direct line to the state investigator's office. They're ready to receive whatever evidence we collect." She spread out a detailed form. They were very specific about maintaining chain of custody. Everything needs to be time-stamped and logged. Ansel carefully loaded the tranquilizer darts, his veterinary training making the task second nature. "These are just precautionary," he explained, checking each one. "If any dogs are in distress, we need to be able to safely contain them." He adjusted the small body camera clipped to his shirt pocket, making sure its lens was unobstructed. Greta had transformed the wall into a tactical map of the warehouse area. Red pins marked every possible entry and exit point. "I've identified 3 main approaches," she said, tracing routes with her finger. "The loading dock here, the side, entrance, and the emergency exit. Based on their patterns, they'll most likely use the loading dock for any major shipment." "And you're sure the rumor will reach them?" Ansel asked, glancing at Ivy. She smiled. "Already has. I had my contact at the county office mention a premium shipment coming in today, the kind of high-value breeds Vale can't resist. They'll show up." Lumen watched them from her corner bed, her eyes alert and focused. Ansel couldn't help but wonder if she understood what they were planning. She had led them this far. Her training as an accelerant detection dog had been the key to understanding the scope of Vale's operation. They moved their vehicles into position well before noon, parking where they could maintain clear sight lines of the warehouse while remaining inconspicuous. Greta monitored the police scanner while Ivy kept in contact with her state-level connections. Ansel checked his camera feed one final time. "Movement!" Greta's voice crackled over their secure channel at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. "RV approaching from the north." Ansel's heart rate picked up as he watched the familiar vehicle lumber into view. Through his camera's zoom lens, he could see Kendrick Vale himself behind the wheel, looking smug and confident. The RV backed up to the loading dock with practiced precision. "Starting recording," he whispered, making sure his body camera was active. The quality had to be perfect. No breaks in footage, no questions about authenticity. Vale and 2 associates began unloading their cargo. Through his lens, Ansel captured crystal-clear images of red gas cans being moved from the RV into the warehouse. The afternoon sun caught the county labels on several crates, official property being used for unauthorized purposes. Got eyes on the ledger, Ivy murmured through their earpieces. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Her zoom lens focused on the paperwork being passed between Vale's men, documenting what appeared to be falsified records. For nearly 40 minutes, they maintained their positions, gathering irrefutable evidence of every illegal action. Each photo, every second of video was automatically uploading to secure servers that Harp couldn't touch. "This is it," Greta breathed. "This is everything we need." For the first time in weeks, Ansel felt hope bubble up in his chest. They had done it. Gathered solid, verifiable proof that would hold up under state scrutiny. Evidence that showed the connection between the shelter fire, the trafficking operation, and Vale's illegal activities. "Police bands active," Greta suddenly warned. "Harp's car just checked in nearby." "Time to go," Ivy said firmly. "We've got what we need. Don't get greedy." They withdrew with the same precision they had used to set up, careful not to draw attention. As Ansel drove away, he caught a glimpse in his rearview mirror of Sheriff Harp's patrol car pulling into the warehouse lot. But for once, the sight didn't fill him with dread. They had beaten Harp to the punch. The evidence was already secure and beyond his reach. Back at the clinic, they began organizing their findings. Ivy immediately started preparing files for the state investigators while Greta backed up all their footage. Lumen watched them work, her tail wagging slightly as if she sensed their success. "Look at this," Greta said, reviewing the footage. "You can clearly see the same accelerant containers that were linked to the shelter fire. The state lab will be able to confirm the match." Ansel nodded, relief making him almost dizzy. All those animals in the shelter, all the records they destroyed, it's finally going to come to light. "This is just the beginning," Ivy reminded them, but she was smiling too. "But it's a good beginning. A solid foundation for the state to build their case on." The afternoon sun slanted through the clinic windows, warming the room. For the first time since he'd first discovered the RV's dark purpose, Ansel felt the tight knot of worry in his chest begin to loosen. They had done it, gathered the evidence, maintained the chain of custody, and secured it beyond local interference. The night air felt electric with possibility as Ansel, Greta, and Ivy drove away from the warehouse. Their evidence cameras and drives were safely tucked away, each moment of Vale's operation captured in crystal-clear detail. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty country road ahead. Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed in their rearview mirror. Ansel's heart skipped a beat as he pulled over, recognizing Deputy Waverly's patrol car. The deputy approached their vehicle, his face shining with sweat despite the cool night air. "I need those drives," Waverly said, his voice tight. "Chain of custody protocols. We have to log everything properly through official channels." Greta clutched the bag containing their evidence. "But we were going to send this directly to the state investigators." "That's not procedure," Waverly cut in, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "I'm trying to help you here. If we don't do this by the book, Vale's lawyers will tear it apart." Ansel and Greta exchanged worried glances. They'd trusted Waverly, seen his disgust at the corruption. After a long moment, Greta handed over the bag. "I'll get these logged and secured right away," Waverly promised. But something in his eyes didn't match his words. Hours crawled by without word from Waverly. Then Ivy's phone rang. Her contact at the state office hadn't received anything. With growing dread, she made some calls. The truth hit like a physical blow. Vale had the drives. All their evidence gone. That night, Ansel jolted awake to the sound of breaking glass. Heavy footsteps echoed through his clinic. By the time he reached the front, masked figures were already ransacking the place. They moved with purpose, destroying everything in their path. X-ray screens shattered under baseball bats. Patient files scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. "Stop!" Ansel shouted, but they ignored him. A scream cut through the chaos. Greta had arrived for her early morning shift, walking straight into the destruction. Before Ansel could reach her, one of the men grabbed her arm and shoved her hard against the counter. The crack of breaking bone was followed by her cry of pain. "Greta!" Ansel rushed to her side as the men fled, leaving devastation in their wake. She cradled her broken wrist, tears streaming down her face. "Lumen," she gasped through the pain. "Where's Lumen?" The realization hit him like ice water. Ansel ran to the back room where Lumen always slept. Her crate lay overturned, empty. The dog bed was torn apart, stuffing strewn across the floor. But Lumen herself was gone. Morning light crept through the broken windows, illuminating the full extent of the damage. Ivy arrived to find Ansel standing in the corner where Lumen's crate had been, staring at the empty space as if he could will her back through sheer desperation. "I just got back from the hospital with Greta," Ivy said softly. "Her wrist is broken, but she'll heal." Ansel nodded numbly. The betrayal cut deep. Waverly, the one deputy they'd believed in, had handed everything to Vale. Their evidence was gone, Greta was injured, and Lumen. The loss of the dog felt like a physical ache in his chest. She'd started all this, leading him to the truth, trusting him to make it right. Now she was in Vale's hands, and Ansel couldn't bear to think about what that meant. "We trusted him," Ansel said, his voice hollow. "We trusted Waverly, and he sold us out." Ivy put a hand on his shoulder. "We'll find another way. We'll get Lumen back." But Ansel barely heard her. He kept seeing Lumen's amber eyes so full of trust when she'd first chosen to follow him. The investigation had just become deeply, painfully personal. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about saving a friend who'd trusted him to protect her. In the ruins of his clinic, surrounded by broken equipment and scattered files, Ansel felt the weight of his failure pressing down on him. The corner where Lumen had slept seemed to echo with her absence, a void he wasn't sure how to fill. The victory they'd felt just hours ago had crumbled into ashes, leaving them wounded, betrayed, and more alone than ever. The burner phone buzzed in Ansel's pocket at 3:15 in the morning. His hands trembled as he read the text message. "Come alone if you want your mutt." A second message followed with GPS coordinates leading to the old limestone quarry on the outskirts of town. Ansel knew the place, a maze of switchback trails descending to deep pits where limestone had been, carved from the earth decades ago. He couldn't call for backup. Not after what happened with Deputy Waverly. Not when Lumen's life hung in the balance. Instead, he prepared methodically, his veterinary training taking over. From his ransacked clinic, he retrieved a single tranquilizer dart, carefully measuring the dosage. One shot would be all he'd get, if he got the chance at all. Before leaving, he found a small scrap of bandage that had fallen from Lumen's injured leg during the attack. He tucked it into his vest pocket, close to his heart. The familiar antiseptic smell reminded him of the trust in her amber eyes when he'd first treated her wounds. He wouldn't fail her again. The drive to the quarry took 20 minutes through the pre-dawn darkness. A light rain had started, making the gravel access road treacherous. Ansel parked well back from the entrance, not wanting his headlights to announce his arrival. The quarry loomed ahead like an open wound in the earth. Rain slicked the metal railings along the switchback paths. Each step had to be carefully placed on the wet limestone. One slip could send him plummeting into the darkness below. Ansel moved slowly, every sense alert. The rain muffled distant sounds, creating a cocoon of tension. Water dripped from his hair into his eyes. The tranquilizer dart felt heavy in his pocket, a single chance at making this right. After 10 minutes of careful descent, he spotted movement on the catwalk ahead. The metal walkway stretched across one of the deepest pits in the quarry, and there, illuminated by weak security lights, stood Kendrick Vale. The sight made Ansel's blood run cold. Vale held Lumen suspended over the edge of the catwalk, one hand gripped in the scruff of her neck. In his other hand, a pistol pointed steadily at Ansel's chest. Lumen's legs paddled helplessly in the air, searching for solid ground that wasn't there. "That's far enough, Doctor," Vale called out, his voice echoing off the quarry walls. "Nice of you to join us for this little reunion." Ansel forced himself to stop, calculating distances in his head. The dart would need at least 15 feet to be effective. Right now, he was closer to 30 feet away. Too far. "Let her go, Vale," Ansel said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "She's just a dog." Vale laughed, the sound sharp and ugly in the rain. "Just a dog? This mutt nearly ruined everything. Should have finished her off in that shelter fire last year, but she somehow got out. Caused me no end of trouble since then." "The shelter fire," Ansel repeated, taking a careful step forward. "You're admitting to arson?" "Why not?" Vale's grin was visible even in the dim light. "It was a clean finish. Insurance paid out, records gone. Nobody asked too many questions except you and your little team of do-gooders. But that's all wrapped up now, isn't it? Your evidence is gone. Your clinic's trashed. And soon this loose end will be tied up too." He dangled Lumen further out over the edge. The dog whimpered, her eyes fixed on Ansel with desperate trust. Another. Step forward. 25 feet now. Still too far. "You won't get away with this," Ansel said, more to keep Vale talking than anything else. "I already have," Vale sneered. "Sheriff Harp's been on my payroll for years. Your pet deputy turned over everything you had. Face it, Doctor, you lost." The rain intensified, drumming on the metal catwalk. Ansel's hand crept toward his pocket, feeling for the dart. 20 feet now, getting closer. Vale's gun hand never wavered. He warned. "Hands where I can see them. One wrong move and your precious Lumen takes a long fall into the dark. How deep do you think this pit is, Doctor? Deep enough that even a vet couldn't put her back together." The moment stretched tight as wire. Ansel stood frozen, rain running down his face, heart pounding. Lumen's life literally hung by a thread, Vale's grip on her neck fur. The gun pointed steadily at his chest. No backup coming, no help in sight. One wrong move would send Lumen plummeting into the darkness below. But doing nothing wasn't an option, either. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, a storm approaching to match the tension crackling in the air between them. Time seemed to slow as Ansel's hand moved with practiced precision. In one fluid motion, he pulled the dart from his pocket and flicked it forward. The needle found its mark, plunging deep into Vale's thigh. Vale's eyes widened in shock, his finger instinctively squeezing the trigger as the sedative began to take effect. The gunshot cracked through the air like thunder, going wild as Vale lurched sideways. Lumen took advantage of his weakening grip, twisting free and scrambling away from the edge. Above them, on the quarry rim, the sound echoed off the limestone walls. A new sound caught Ansel's attention, liquid sloshing. He looked up to see Vale's RV parked precariously close to the quarry's edge, its fuel tank punctured by the stray bullet. Dark liquid streamed out, mixing with the rainwater and creating snaking rivers down the rocky slope. Vale stumbled, dropping his gun as the tranquilizer began to take hold. But as he fell, his boot caught an old storm lantern that had been sitting on the catwalk. The lantern tumbled, glass shattering. Its dying flame caught the fuel-slicked water, igniting an angry ribbon of fire that raced toward a stack of crates. Near the RV, Ansel's heart stopped as he heard the frightened whimpers coming from those crates. More dogs, evidence of Vale's operation, but more importantly, innocent lives at stake. He had a split-second choice to make. Try to preserve the evidence they'd fought so hard to gather, or save the animals trapped inside. It wasn't really a choice at all. "Hang on!" he shouted, sprinting toward the crates as the flames spread. The heat was intense, even through the rain. His fingers fumbled with the padlocks, finally finding purchase. He pulled a multi-tool from his pocket and began slicing through. the locks as quickly as he could. The first crate broke open, and a terrified shepherd mix bolted out. "Up the ramp!" Ansel urged, pointing to the quarry's access road. The dog didn't need to be told twice. One by one, he freed more dogs, a bloodhound, 2 pit bulls, a trembling spaniel. Each one raced to safety as soon as their cage door opened. The boy, fire was spreading faster now, feeding on spilled fuel and old wooden pallets. Smoke burned Ansel's eyes as he worked his way through the remaining locks. His lungs ached, but he couldn't stop, not while there were still animals trapped. Finally, the last crate was empty. But where was Lumen? A familiar bark drew his attention. Back to the catwalk where Vale lay unconscious. Lumen stood there, refusing to leave without him. "Coming!" Ansel called, starting back across the metal walkway. The heat from the flames had weakened the already deteriorating structure. As Ansel reached the halfway point, a horrible groaning sound filled the air. The catwalk shuddered violently, then gave way with a screech of tearing metal. Ansel lunged forward, managing to grab onto a hanging support beam as the walkway collapsed beneath him. He dangled precariously, muscles straining, the 100-foot drop to the quarry floor yawning beneath his feet. But then he felt something catch hold of his sleeve, Lumen's strong jaws clamping down on the fabric. The loyal dog braced herself, on what remained of the catwalk, muscles trembling with effort as she began to pull. Slowly, steadily, she helped him climb to safety, not letting go until he was back on solid ground. Headlights suddenly cut through the rain and smoke. Car doors slammed and familiar voices called out. Ivy had arrived with state troopers in tow, their blue and red lights painting the quarry walls in alternating colors. "Over here!" Ansel shouted, waving them down. The troopers rushed forward, some securing the unconscious Vale, while others helped. Ansel led them to where the rescued dogs had gathered. More sirens wailed in the distance as fire trucks approached. But it was too late for the RV. Flames had completely engulfed it, destroying whatever evidence remained inside. The heat was so intense that the vehicle's shell began to collapse in on itself, sending sparks shooting into the rainy night sky. Ansel knelt beside Lumen, wrapping his arms around her wet fur as they watched Vale being handcuffed and loaded into a patrol car. The trafficking ring that had caused so much suffering was finally falling apart, just like the burning RV above them. Justice would be served not through preserved evidence, but through the living proof of the rescued animals themselves. In the weeks following the quarry incident, Ivy's meticulous audit of Vale Animal Services revealed a web of corruption that stretched back years. The state investigators descended on the county offices with search warrants, methodically boxing up files and hard drives that painted a damning picture of kickbacks, falsified records, and systematic abuse. Kendrick Vale sat stone-faced in the county courthouse as the charges were read: animal cruelty, trafficking, fraud, arson, and attempted murder. Sheriff Harp's appearance followed, his badge already surrendered, his familiar authority stripped away to reveal just another man in an orange jumpsuit facing justice. The county board voted unanimously to void Vale's contract. The emergency meeting room buzzed with whispers as decades of corruption unraveled in a single afternoon. Deputy Waverly, hoping for leniency, had turned state's evidence, providing detailed testimony about the payments, the cover-ups, and the network of silence that had protected it all. Back at the clinic, healing took a different form. Greta's cast came off on a sunny Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the attack. She flexed her fingers carefully, testing the newly mended bones, and immediately got to work. The broken X-ray machines had been replaced, the scattered files reorganized, and fresh paint covered the scars of that violent night. "You don't have to dive right back in," Ansel told her, watching her methodically sterilize equipment. "Yes, I do," she replied with a smile that held no bitterness. "This is where I belong." Together, they rebuilt more than just the physical space. New protocols were established, security systems installed, and relationships with local rescue groups strengthened. The clinic transformed from a lone outpost into a hub of community care. One morning, Ansel arrived to find Greta had already started their first appointments. She moved with confidence, her recovered wrist steady as she held a trembling chihuahua for its vaccines. The sight struck him. He didn't need to carry everything alone anymore. That afternoon, he pulled out the adoption papers he'd been keeping in his desk. The forms were simple: name of adopter, name of animal, date. His pen hesitated over Lumen's information. Her microchip number was still partially burned away, her official history fragmented. But her present and future were clear. "You've been mine since that first morning," he told her as he signed his name. Lumen watched him with those intelligent amber eyes, her tail thumping steadily against the floor. That night, for the first time in months, Ansel drove home instead of sleeping in his exam room. The old habit of staying close, of being constantly on guard, had been hard to break. But as he walked through his front door with Lumen at his side, it felt right. They settled into a routine: morning walks, breakfast on the porch, evenings spent reading while Lumen dozed nearby. The hypervigilance that had marked her early days softened. She no longer startled at sudden movements or stared fixedly down the road, watching for threats. Instead, she learned to relax, to play, to simply be a dog beloved by her person. One crisp morning, as sunrise painted the sky in gentle pinks and golds, Ansel sat in his porch rocker with a cup of coffee. Lumen pressed against his leg, her head resting on his knee. The morning paper lay unopened beside them, its headline announcing Vale's sentencing, but Ansel wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about choices, the small ones that led to larger ones, the moments that shaped who a person becomes: a stray dog fixated on a rusted RV, a door forced open, a decision to look closer, to ask questions, to stand firm when it would have been easier to look away. Ivy found them there later that morning. She'd come to deliver the final audit report, but paused at the sight of them together on the porch. "You know," she said quietly, "when I first took this case, I thought it was just about insurance fraud and missing inventory. But watching you these past months, you didn't just save those dogs. You chose who you are. Every step of the way, you chose to be the person who would fight for them, no matter the cost." Ansel considered her words as he scratched behind Lumen's ears. The scars on her muzzle had faded to silver, barely visible now unless you knew where to look. Like his own invisible scars, they were marks of survival, of strength found in darkness. "We chose each other," he said simply. Ivy nodded, understanding what he meant. Sometimes salvation worked both ways. Sometimes the act of saving another soul helped you find your own path, your own truth. The morning stretched on, peaceful and bright. The clinic would open soon, bringing its usual parade of wagging tails and worried owners. There would be animals to heal, trust to build, lives to touch. But for now, Ansel sat with his dog in the growing warmth of day, feeling the rightness of where they'd landed. The rusted RV that had started it all was long gone, but the bond forged in those tense days remained. It had been tempered by danger, strengthened by loyalty, and finally transformed into something beautiful. A partnership built on courage, trust, and the simple truth that sometimes the greatest acts of healing come from being exactly who you're meant to be. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.